Hello, guys and gals, and welcome. So we're going to be doing a review of Elden Ring DLC, The Shadow of Erdtree, and try to be as thorough as I can. I can't guarantee there won't be any spoilers in here, but I'll do my best not to just like completely spoil everything. The we're going to be talking a lot about a lot of the different things within the Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree. Everything from weapons, bosses, and the general design of the DLC versus the original game. So I hope you'll join me as we get started. Now, before we get started, I would like to give a big shout out to the Volari pillow that I used all throughout my gameplay of Elden Ring. If you guys have never seen one of these beautiful Volari pillows, I have mine right here. This is my Oni Volari pillow. It's definitely helped me through my gameplay of Elden Ring. And if you're wondering what the hell this thing does, well, you can kind of see it on the camera. You notice how like my elbows hit the pillow here, and when my hands come down, I have like the controller in my hands, and it gives me a very nice place to rest my elbows and my hand controller hand, and it just makes the entire gaming with the controller way better. If you want to pick up your own, there's definitely some pretty good discounts that you can get. You can also use my specific code. I do have a code that will get you a discount as an affiliate of Volari, and it's a pretty simple code. It's just GGM16, nothing too fancy. And I'll flash that up on the screen real quick just for fun. So GGM16, use that when you check out, and that will give you a discount on the Volari pillow. The It also gives me a kickback too with my line. But honestly, I really, really, really love this pillow. While I was doing these runs, I cannot talk this thing up more. Like, just the like normally I ended up with like the numb, like the numb elbows and like the numb hands when you play with the controller for too long. But not with this pillow, man. I'm telling you, like I've been literally gaming. I was gaming for like 12 hours a day, every day for multiple days, playing Elden Ring DLC. Not a single numb elbow, not a single numb hand, and freaking love it. So be sure to check out the Volari gaming pillow because it's freaking amazing. Moving on to the DLC. Let's hop in here and let's take a look at this real quick. So I have a lot of things that I want to talk about, and first off, let's talk about like just how beautiful the game is. And I'm going to take you to one of my favorite places, which is the Cerulean Forest. It's right here, the Cerulean Coast, and this is one of the coolest areas to go just visually because there's so much beautiful. I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, just look at this place. Like you got like the blue floaty little glowy things, and the whole place is just a field of flowers. And it's amazing to ride around and just explore the world. There's so many like really beautiful places that you just kind of have to stop and just admire, how the game is. Um, and I think that a lot of people, as they're playing through, will have a lot of fun with, just exploring the game. Not even playing, not even beating the bosses, not even killing the monsters, just having fun exploring and just it's super fun. This sunflower comes from a boss toward the ends of the game. It's pretty darn cool. I'm not gonna lie. It's fun running around beating things with a sunflower. And speaking of the sunflower, the DLC has a lot of really nice additions to the game. So even if you don't necessarily want to, say do the DLC itself, maybe you just want to have fun with the base game or something, or maybe you don't like how the bosses are. There's tons of items that can be gathered, weapons, talismans, spells, all sorts of amazing stuff. Like this giant sunflower with the freaking headbutt attack here, like headbutts the ground because that's technically the sunflower's head. There's all sorts of other neat weapons. Like during my playthrough, I've been able to come across things like Knightlita's sword, which was really fun. The Milady blade. Also found the sword lance, which actually comes from one of the worst bosses in the game. Rakasha's great katana, which is really powerful. this crazy thing, the Putrescence Cleaver, which I can only show you, and you can see how ridiculous it is. Even the main attack of this is ridiculous. Like, look at this thing. Like, what the hell even is that? What kind of attack is the like the backward like? I don't even know. Like, there's so many fun new weapons and new spells and new abilities, and not only that, but there's a whole lot of new talismans too. Like, there's the two-headed turtle talisman. There's the Crimson Seed talisman, which is really neat. They also added a what was it? The blue. I think it's the Blessed Dew, or is it the blue Blessed Blue Dew? I can't remember which one. I think it's this one. They added that one. I mean, there's tons of new talismans in here, things that'll help you on your journey and give you extra damage or more defensiveness, and can be used definitely to help you in various ways. I think a lot of people will have fun playing around with all the new talismans, and especially some of the new items and spells and whatnot. Like, for instance, I was utilizing this one earlier, which is a Ghost Flame Ash of War. It's actually really cool. It actually has multiple attacks. Let me go somewhere without flowers, because it's a ground-based attack, and kind of give you an idea of how this works. So the ability actually has two functions. The first one is a regular, like, fire attack, which is pretty darn cool. And the regular fire attack looks like this. And then from this point, you can change how the fire attack works by changing how you interact with the fire that you create. So, for instance, if you light attack, the fire goes on the ground and creates a damage over time effect, which does some pretty good damage. And if you attack with a heavy attack instead, it causes an explosion, which does some pretty good damage as well. It's a fire attack that's also cold damage, which is pretty good. It's a ghost flame. There's also a lot of new armor equipment that you can find throughout the game, like the Crucible Tree armor. Actually, I think that might be old. But there's definitely a lot of interesting new pieces, like this crazy lion helmet, the Divine Beast head. That one is, I don't even know what to say about that. There's also some other pieces of equipment, like the Circlet of Lights, which is a glowy circlet on your head. And honestly, I think as you play the game, you'll definitely come across some pretty crazy pieces of equipment that can help you build your character the way you want. So moving on, let's talk about the bosses. So far, all the bosses have been pretty fun, and unfortunately all of my bosses are currently dead, so it's not really easy for me to show you the bosses, but I do have my live stream from yesterday that I can pull up, and we can kind of just like go over some of the bosses. But for the most part, what do I want to say about the bosses? Well, I want to say that I liked the majority of them. I mean, I don't know exactly how many there are. I think some of them count as bosses, even though there's multiple bosses. But there's at least like 30 plus. Some of them are duplicates, like for instance the torch monsters that roam around that you can kill. That are they're a little boring, to be perfectly honest, but they're okay. Like I didn't necessarily think that they were horrible additions to the game, but they weren't. They weren't like the best additions in my opinion. And there's so many different bosses, like there's Putrescent Knight, which is pretty darn cool. The Putrescent Knight is this one that you have to like jump off a platform for, and I'm pretty sure he's right here. The Putrescent Knight is the one that I showed you that has that weapon, the specific cold damage giant, like, I don't even know what the hell you call it, like almost like a boomerang weapon or something. And, you know, there's tons of different bosses in the game, and there's only 2 of them out of all of the bosses that I fought that I would consider to be kind of like garbage class bosses. And those 2 are Commander Gaius and Consort Radon. The 2 of them, they are probably the most luck-based fights out of the entire DLC. Everything else felt relatively well-balanced and pretty fair. For the most part, like, especially when we're talking about things like the, trying to think here, trying not to give too much away with spoilers, but, so, you know, like Relena at the beginning, she was pretty tough, but she was a fair fight. You know, the Putrescent Knight, he was kind of a tough little fight, but I did manage to kill him in a couple tries. Mesmer was absolutely amazing. A lot of the fights were just they were just really beautiful fights, like the one with the giant caterpillar that was pretty cool. And there's also some returning bosses from like the previous, like before the DLC. They kind of just like re-upped them, made them a little bit stronger, put them in some random places for you to find, like the Moonfall Beast. You get to fight the Moonfall Beast again, and so forth and so on. I think for the most part, the bosses were pretty fair. But I also have a comment to make about the bosses in general, and that is I don't really like the design like that they're pushing toward. I'm gonna say this kind of like mm, the day the music died. The DLC is literally the day that the music died. If you played Elden Ring, or if you've played Elden Ring in the past, and you fought bosses in the non DLC content, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's like a music, almost like a rhythm, a beat that occurs when you fight a boss, and you start to learn that rhythm, and you start to, like figure out the boss by that rhythm. And the rhythm can almost even take the place of a song, for instance. Like you might start humming a song in your head as you start to get the rhythm, and the song that you're humming in your head helps you keep the rhythm so that you know exactly when to roll and dodge, so you know that exactly when to, like to block or to parry or whatnot, right? And the rhythm of the fight was, it was almost beautiful. Like because you would start fighting a boss and you would start to understand the rhythm of the boss, and you would, it would be like, da 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 da, dodge 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 dodge, da 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 da, attack dodge, like, and you would get in this rhythm. But the DLC bosses, there's very little rhythm. There's very little music. And especially Radon and Commander Gaius, they feel very random and out of touch with the original game. And it's not that I'm necessarily upset that the DLC took on a different way of trying to make things difficult, but I feel like it's a direction that From Software should not pursue. Um, like, I'm not sad that I played the DLC, mind you, but if another game later on down the road, say like Elden Ring 2 or something, were made under the same auspices as the DLC, with these hyper aggressive, almost like randomized bosses where it doesn't really seem to follow any kind of set pattern or rhythm, it's not a game that I'm really interested in, to be perfectly honest. I feel like it's it's definitely one of those things that it's fun to experience it for a little while, especially with the hyper aggressive nature of a lot of these bosses. And oh my god, are they hyper aggressive? I mean, so ridiculously hyper aggressive to the point where, like, for instance, with Radon, I had to focus on defense. Like, I really never use a shield versus anybody, and Radon was the first one that really kind of forced me to use a shield because he's so hyper aggressive. And his attacks are so punishing to rollers. So if you roll to avoid damage, he punishes you for that because a lot of his attacks come with an added secondary of like ground-based damage that comes up underneath of you, right? So even if you do successfully roll and dodge the ability, a lot of the times you would still end up getting hit by the subsequent damage that would come after with the pulse. Now, during the first phase, I did feel like Radon was relatively easy. Like, not, I mean, I wouldn't say that he was broken in this phase. I do feel like this phase, he's more fair than in the second phase. The second phase, things get absolutely ridiculous with him, and I really feel like the second phase is where the fight goes downhill tremendously. And let me see if I can get to the second phase. I actually kill him relatively quickly here through using the poke method. Which I really didn't want to have to do, but when I finally came to the realization that dodge rolling on Radon was basically useless because of how he attacks, I kind of just decided that, it was better to focus on the defense than the offense. Let me see if I can get to the second phase portion here. Another big issue that I had with the way that they kind of like designed the bosses in the DLC is they really kind of pushed the bosses into an interrupting sort of a sequence, and the interrupting sequence is really bad. And what I mean by this is, so if you fight the bosses, a lot of the times they have these big, huge attacks, right? And right here you can see, like when he goes to do this attack, he hits the ground, right? And that attack can be dodged. And then the second attack that comes afterward is the explosion of the ground, which usually ends up hitting you because you dodged the first one. It's a little bit difficult to dodge both of them. But a lot of the bosses seem to be designed this way to prevent casting, and I feel bad for people that play casters that have relatively long incantations or weapon skills that have relatively long attacks, because it's very difficult to get off any attacks with the way that the attacks work on these particular bosses. They're very, very punishing to anybody who would try to cast any abilities that are not, short, like little tiny casts, like little light attacks. God forbid you have like a heavy attack or something like that. And here's the second phase, and I just kind of want to show you this. So during the second phase, you notice how every single time he attacks, it's followed up by a ground-based damage pump. So if you dodge the first attack, the second attack, the ground-based damage pump, usually ends up hitting you anyway. And it also tends to interrupt abilities. So because he has these constant little small AoEs that are happening on a regular basis, you end up with a very difficult situation in casting. Honestly, most of the time when I was fighting Radahn, it really just kind of felt like I got lucky. Even after I killed him, it wasn't really satisfying in my opinion. And I don't want to see From Software continue this like the methodology for designing bosses. I feel like no matter what, if they continue down this road, they're going to eventually end up kind of like losing their player base. Um, in fact, they may already have lost people because of this. And by the way, that hair is so ridiculous. You can't even see what the hell Radahn's doing half the time because of that ridiculous hair on the back. The hair needs to be nerfed, my friends. But the fight itself just didn't feel satisfying. Killing him didn't feel satisfying. And I did eventually, of course, kill him. It's in here somewhere, of course, I'm sure. Let me see if I can fast forward to my winning combo. So I think this is the one right here where I beat Radahn. I'm not sure that the hyper aggressiveness of the bosses is really the right direction to go. And I also, like I said before, I feel like the rhythm being lost from the bosses has taken something away from the game as well, because it definitely felt a lot more satisfying to beat a boss by learning his patterns and his rhythms and understanding when you can attack and when you can't. But these bosses are so hyper aggressive that you'll often spend, like 10, 15, sometimes even like 20 attacks before you have breathing room to be able to do just about anything. And it's one of the reasons why I decided to go with a shield with this fight, because there was no breathing room for anything. And the shield at least gives you the ability to attack and defend at the same time. It's one of the very beautiful things about running a shield and a spear at the same time, is you can hold the shield up and you can attack from behind the shield. And that's kind of like par for the course with a lot of the bosses in the DLC, is that they're so hyper aggressive that you often have very little openings to actually return fire. And that leads you to, well, shield poke, basically, because it gives you the ability to dish out damage while you're defending. And what else are you going to do when the bosses are so hyper aggressive that like you have to literally get hit about like 10, 15, maybe even 20 times sometimes before you're allowed to, to have a counterattack. of any type. And then this boss in particular seems to be almost designed to punish rolling, because you could often get pulled out of the roll for various things. Like for instance, his suck in could pull you while you were rolling. The all the little AOE effects on the ground can hit you while you're rolling, and it just seems like in general he's designed to punish people who are rolling to avoid attacks, which is really quite strange. Ooh, I probably should have dodged that. To this last part where he literally, I think he gets away with like 1 HP or something. It's ridiculous. And I'm just kind of like standing there, like, come on down. Can you please come on back down so I can poke you, sir? I'd really appreciate it if I could poke you a couple more times. And voila, I managed to kill him while poking. Wasn't even really very fun. Honestly, I do think that the Elden Ring DLC is worth getting. I think that it's fun. If you enjoyed the base game, I think you'll enjoy the Elden Ring DLC. Maybe eventually they'll fix Radon to be less random and luck based, and maybe they'll also fix Commander Gaius to be less random and luck based. You'll be able to kill them. You'll be able to kill Radon. You'll be able to kill Gaius, but it doesn't mean that they're not unfun and just boring fights. I mean, a lot of the times it was really just a matter of running in, seeing what combination of attacks you would get. If the combinations of attacks were terrible, then you just kind of just moved on, right? I think that's pretty much it for this. The map is huge. It's huge. I mean, if you take a look at the original map, this is the original map for the non DLC content. You notice there's like this big empty space here in the center of the regular content. A lot of people have actually taken the map for the DLC, and it actually fits almost perfectly inside the center of this, um, quite nicely. Like, and most of this the original game is not really as big as the new game. The new game is the DLC content, the Realm of Shadow. It's freaking huge. Like, I mean, it's ridiculously huge, a lot bigger than you would think. There's underground areas, there's entire like mountaintop areas, there's huge areas that are just dedicated to specific bosses. On top of that, I mean, the exploration is so fun, just running around finding everything. One thing I will say about the Scadu tree fragments, which are kind of required to do the content, is that basically what happens is when you first start playing the game, all the monsters kind of have like a damage bump, and they take less damage from you. And then you collect these Scadu tree fragments, which slowly and surely takes the damage, and puts it back to a normal value. And I think like once you hit 20, I think you like gain 5% damage or something from like the damage that they took away or something like that, and you're back to your normal values. Sometimes, especially when like early on in the game, it definitely feels like not having enough Scadu tree fragments can be a big hassle. And going out and collecting them, they're kind of just like spread all over the place. Some of them are kind of hidden in weird places. So there's these guys all throughout the game, and let me see if I can show you one real quick, because that way we can hammer it home that way. I know for a fact there's one right here. So there's these monsters in the game. They're just kind of like gray shadows, and they have like pots on their heads. And normally the pot monsters will throw their pot at you. However, there are very specific pot monsters that do not throw their pot at you, and instead they run away. For those of you who've played Diablo 3 or Diablo 4 and are familiar with the treasure goblins, it's basically the same principle. They essentially act as treasure goblins, and they kind of run away from you, and then they disappear. And these guys have a lot of the Scadu tree fragments that you might be missing if you're trying to get things, and you might have to like look for them, or maybe even look up their locations. But once you know that they exist, you'll have a lot easier time, finding them and killing them. Let me see if I can find a non-special one first before I show you the special one, so that you can tell the difference between the two. This is a special one right here. Okay, let me. He hasn't seen me yet, so let me pull out the old binoculars, and I'll give you this little tip right here for those of you who are still playing the DLC and may not have known this. See this pot guy? See how he's all sparkly? He's very sparkly. This is one of the ones that contains Erdtree fragments. They also contain other random items, which are also very valuable, like good materials and other things. But some of them specifically just simply contain Erdtree fragments or other things. Now, when you go to engage them, they actually will not throw their pot at you, and instead they start running, and then they get down on the ground like that, and you see that they disappear. If you don't kill them quickly, you lose access to the Erdtree fragment that they will drop you. If you kill them quickly, usually they end up dropping the Erdtree fragment on the floor, and that gives you obviously your buff, your upgrade, right? If you find one that's not special, like for instance this one right here, you notice how he does not have the sparkly aura, and on top of that, he throws his pot at me. So if the guy throws his pot at you, if he's not sparkly, then he's not one of the special ones that you need to keep your eyes out for, and there's a bunch of them all over the place as you're exploring sorry, areas. So you got to keep your eyes out for them, and you got to kill them whenever you can. And you got to be quick, as you can see, because they like to disappear on you. And you can make them refresh by going back to the bonfire, or the grace, I believe is what it's called. You go back to the grace, and they will come back. But you still only have like a couple seconds to kill them before they disappear. And while I think the Erdtree fragments were a really good mechanic, I do think some of them are just a little bit too crazily hidden. Like these guys right here, I would have never known until somebody told me, basically. And now you guys know as well. So this is, so you can see, that's one of the special ones. Now, I've already gotten the Erdtree fragment from this guy, so he's not going to drop me another one. So keep that in mind as well. They don't drop you multiple. And most of the time, once you've gotten the special item, like the Erdtree fragment or the reveled spirits or whatever else they're getting, sometimes they won't drop you anything anymore after that. Or they'll just drop you like the basic loot and not the special loot after the first time. That's another neat little trick here. It kind of reminds me of the beetles from the regular one. I only saw one beetle, by the way, in the DLC, the little beetles that you kill for stuff, and he just gave me something simple like a smithing stone. And these are the blessings right here. So you see I have Erdtree Blessing 19, and I also have Revered Spirit Ashes 9. And of course I don't have enough Revered Spirit Ashes or Erdtree Fragments to get the final upgrade on both of these. Erdtree goes to 20, and Revered Spirit Ash Blessing goes to 10. I think that pretty much covers everything. There's so much fun stuff to find in this game. If you enjoyed the original, I think you're really going to enjoy the DLC. I definitely don't want to see them continue in this direction, though. I would really like to see them go back to kind of like the older style of content. Because I feel like they kind of push things a little bit too hard for the sake of trying to make things difficult. And it's a complaint that I've had about many boss fights in the past, especially, like, for instance, if you played Diablo 4 and you fight Lilith. Lilith always feels very random. Like, there's not a lot of cohesive behaviorisms in how the fight works, and a lot of the times you don't feel like you have a chance of beating her every single time because of the random way that things coalesce. For instance, with the Radon fights, I often had issues with him using multiple attacks in a row where I would have no way to survive. There was on one particular occasion I can talk about, is he was firing his meteors at me, and the meteors are pretty easy to dodge. So I ran to the left or the right, and then I rolled at the appropriate moment, and I dodged the meteors. Well, while I was mid-roll, so I hadn't even completed the roll, he used a suck in, and he sucked me toward him. And because of the way that he had sucked me toward him, I ended up hitting 2 of the meteors. And I know I had successfully dodged the meteors, but it didn't matter. Upon reaching him, of course, the suck-in also does damage. He then proceeded to use his AoE spike attack around me in a circle, and I had no ability to dodge because I was still reeling from getting hit by the meteors that he had pulled me through. And I went from full HP on a successful dodge of the meteors to dead relatively quickly, and I couldn't help but say to myself, well, there's pretty much nothing I could have done there. The combination of attacks was just unfortunately not in my favor. And I don't like to see that in Elden Ring. When I see that in Diablo 4, I just look at the developers of Diablo 4 and I'm like, well, they're not accustomed to making good boss fights. And Elden Ring's boss fights have always felt really fair. In fact, I liked pretty much all of the Elden Ring bosses, with the exception of Placidusax. I thought he was just really boring. Um, he would have made a good cutscene, but for a melee character who actually was trying to kill him, most of the time you would just be watching him fly around, use explosions around himself, preventing you from doing any damage, and the fight would take like 30, 40 minutes just simply because most of the time he was in the air or, like burning flames around himself or like flailing around like a madman. And so Placidus 6 often felt like just a very long and boring fight that you needed a lot of patience for. But overall, most of the bosses in the non DLC content just were pretty amazing to fight. In the DLC, everything is hyper aggressive. Everything attacks you right out of the gate. Everything just kind of feels like it doesn't quite have the same rhythm and beat of the original bosses. And I understand they wanted to make it more difficult, but I mean, I think it's the wrong direction. I just think it's the wrong direction to go to increase the difficulty of the game. Um, Overall, I think I'd give the DLC content probably. I gotta take off points for Gaius. I gotta take off points for Radon, and I also felt like it was a bit laggy. A lot of the times, especially when I was fighting Radon with all the ridiculous explosions, and I'm playing on a 3090 RTX with 32 gigabytes of RAM and a 5800X 3D. So, like my system's not exactly a slouch. And it felt like a lot of the times when there were these massive AoE attacks going on, like especially during Radon, the Fell Moon Beast, and a couple others, I was getting these crazy lag spikes. And I don't necessarily think it was an issue with my system not being able to handle the game, but more so the game not being able to handle the attacks that were going off on a regular basis. I mean, Radon specifically is like a light show of diarrhea. I mean, I don't. It's like Fourth of July explosions everywhere, light everywhere, and he would use these big, giant, exploding AOE attacks constantly that would just cause frame dips, and it's a little rough. So if I had to rate the DLC, I think I'd probably give it an 8, maybe an 8.5. It's really fun. It has some negative things about it. There's definitely a lot to love about the DLC, exploring all the different lands and fighting all the different monsters. There's definitely some monsters that I absolutely hated, like those stupid red fire wizards inside the Shadow Keep. They can go suck it. Those stupid red fire wizards. I can't count how many times I died to those stupid things, just simply because they would just stand like 18,000 feet away, spamming fireballs at me, and knocking me off platforms with knockback attacks. That's also very fun. Um, and I'm trying to think if there's anything that I really didn't enjoy. There was a lot of reused content in the game as well. So I mean, I talked about that briefly, but I kind of want to touch on it just a little bit. Is that they did reuse a lot of older monsters? They made a comeback. Like for instance, you can fight the Fell Moon Beast right here if you want to. If you haven't fought him yet, that's a rehash of the older Fell Moon Beast from the non DLC. You can also refight the demi-human lady. I can't remember her name exactly. She's kind of like underneath. If you guys haven't fought her yet, it's a pretty easy path to get her. You go here, you go up through here, and then there's like a pathway up through this way, which leads you to a beach that's like right about here. And that's another boss that's been kind of like a rehashed from the previous game. There's also a couple other rehashed bosses within the game that are fun to fight. The big fire torch monsters, I talked about those briefly, but I kind of want to like talk about those a little bit more. You know, at first I had no idea how to kill them, and eventually I did figure out how to kill them. They honestly were not really all that fun to kill. The fights were really long and boring, and I felt like most of the time it was just a very boring mechanically uh, dry fight. I mean, you pretty much learned what to do within the first 5 minutes of fighting the boss, and then the HP on the boss was so high that it would often take you, you know, like 10, 20 minutes of sitting there just like attack, attack, jump, dodge, attack, jump, dodge, attack, jump, dodge. Like, of constantly doing the mechanics, only to have like one or two mishaps cause the entire thing to, you know, end in failure. But the mechanics just didn't really feel very fun or engaging, and there were so many of them too. Like, I mean, there's basically what I think there's six of the torch guys, and they have some pretty good loot on them. Don't get me wrong. And there's a very good reason to go hunt them down and kill them because they have things like physic, like hard tier bubbles and like stuff that you can use specifically for your character for you know the remainder of everything. But like they're just so boring in the way that they work mechanically because the fights are so long and drawn out. And of course, if you die or make one mistake or like your controller lags up or something, and you end up, you know, a little end up getting hit by one of the attacks, there's a very good chance that you die, and then you have to start the entire battle over again. And if you're wondering what I'm talking about, let me just there's actually one right here. I forgot there was one right here. So these are the guys right here. They're actually pretty big. They're big, huge monsters. There's also a couple dragons that you can fight too, like ghost flame dragons. They also brought back another one of the older dragons, like the magma dragon from some of the other previous boss areas that you can fight again. And there's a lot of different ones in this game that are rehashed from the older files. These guys, I think, were a miss in my opinion. I mean, in the beginning, they definitely did seem very scary, and they definitely did seem very you know, like tough in terms of like being able to kill them. But once you understood like how easy they were to kill and how boringly long it was to kill them, you kind of just didn't want to go fight them because of how boring the fights were, how long and boring they were. And if one thing I would definitely say with these guys is, I mean, reduce their HP or something. I don't know. The fights shouldn't take like 30 minutes of boring combat, or rework their you know, their actual attacks or something to be a little bit more engaging, so that you can, you know, have fun while you're fighting them, instead of it being just like 30 minutes of straight boredom while you just, you know, like, oh, he's stomping, all right, jump. Oh, he's stomping again, okay, jump. Oh, he's stomping again, okay, jump. Oh, he's doing a big jump with double explosions, okay, run away, okay, jump. All right, run backward. All right, attack his feet like 10,000 times until he finally falls down. And the only thing I will say is that eventually, when you do knock him down, you can do a riposte or whatever. You can, you know, you can hit him with the heavy attack, basically right in his face, and it does do the majority of his HP and damage. But the problem with this is that you have to knock him down, and anybody who's not using a big heavy weapon that does lots of poise damage is going to have a lot of trouble knocking him down. Which relegates these guys to pretty much like use a big honking, you know, hammer, or like a big two-handed halberd or something. Because if you use a smaller weapon, like a lighter weapon, like a dagger or a spear, or, you know, like a one-handed sword or something like that, you're gonna have a really hard time knocking these guys down. And since the majority of the damage comes from actually hitting him in the face with the, you know, attack while he's in his poise broken state, it's even more painful for the characters who are not using big honking weapons. Like if you're a spellcaster, or if you are a light weapon user, or maybe you're a fist user or something like that, you're definitely going to have a lot harder time killing these guys than the people who have the big honking weapons that can poise break better. And speaking of which, you have to poise break him 3 times for him to fall. And do not miss the opportunity to stab him in the face, because you're going to deal like 75% of his health and damage if you stab him directly in his face. The Ghost Flame Dragons were pretty cool. They're basically the same as the dragons from the non DLC content, except they are added. They have a bunch of added effects. You can find a couple of them like pretty much right away. I think there's one Ghost Flame Dragon that I haven't killed, so maybe I'll go hunt him down and we'll kill the last one. But I've already killed two of the Ghost Flame Dragons. They're pretty fun fights, to be honest. Once you get the hang of it and you understand what you're doing, it's pretty cool. Um, I think that's pretty much it. As always, I'd appreciate you guys and gals joining me, even when I'm just prattling on about the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC for Elden Ring. I hope that you guys are enjoying the Elden Ring content. I've got tons of live streams up for you. I'm pretty sure I'm finished with Elden Ring at this point. I even did like a checklist and went over and killed like pretty much every boss to make sure that I had done them all. And I have. I've pretty much done all the bosses at this point. And like I said, the majority of them were very fun. I just really didn't like Commander Gaius or Radon. I think they were both kind of crap. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like button if you enjoy the content, and keep watching.